Events of the recent time has affected almost every sector, especially the oil and gas sector. As a result, Tony Elumelu, the founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, has decried the lack of adequate gas supply is affecting the operations of power plants in the country. Now you know how we do this. Over the next half hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by bringing you in-depth perspectives on what's happening in the business world. First, we'll take a look at the oil sector. Then we'll take a look at Naira float, MBS kicks, housing funds. These and more comes to you after the break. Stay with us. Well, hello and welcome to Business This Week today. My name is Chinwe Nwokocha. We begin today's news with the oil sector. Now, despite oil prices trading at average of $80 per barrel, the sector's contribution to Nigeria's gross domestic country production dropped to an 8-year low in the second quarter of 2023, indicating the fragile nature of the economy. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics says the oil sector contributed 5.34% of the total real GDP in the second quarter of 2023, down from the figure recorded in the corresponding period of 2022 and down from the preceding quarter, where it contributed 6.33% and 6.21% respectively. Now, analysts says Nigeria's oil contribution to the GDP reflects the country's inability to attract investments for active exploration, as well as persistent operational issues that stem oil production growth in Africa's largest oil-producing country. The only way this can be revamped is more investment of an onshore and sustained effort by the security agencies to zero crude oil theft. And still in the oil sector, data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that Nigeria's crude oil and gas mining sector recorded a negative real GDP growth rate of 13.43% in the second quarter of 2023. Now, this marks the 13th consecutive quarter in which the sector has posted negative real GDP growth, extending a downturn that began in the second quarter of 2022 when the COVID-19 pandemic led to a global economic shutdown that included Nigeria. The oil refining subsector has also been in decline, contracting since the second quarter of 2018. Now, the underperformance of Nigeria's refineries has compelled the country to rely on imports for refined petroleum. In terms of GDP composition, both crude oil and gas production and the refining of oil contribute about 5.34 or rather 34% and 0.01% respectively. Crude oil and gas contributed 9.5% to GDP in 2020. Now, in nominal terms, these sectors together account for 2.946 trillion naira, with crude oil and gas production making up to 99% of that total. Well, still talking about crude oil. Now, crude oil theft may have caused the country a whopping 1.9 trillion naira revenue loss in July. According to analysis, this estimation was arrived at following a pronouncement by the National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu. Ribadu said Nigeria was losing 400,000 barrels of crude oil daily due to activities of oil thieves and pipeline vandals. He added that the country had the capacity to produce 2 million barrels of crude oil per day. He further stated that it is quite unfortunate that few individuals would steal the nation's common resources and in the process cause unbelievable loss to the people. The global outlook for oil and gas for 2023 will not be much different from that of last year. Now for Nigeria, it may remain gloomy in terms of revenues unless we are able to improve on production and sustain it, prevent revenue leakages, crude oil thefts, and seek new markets for oil and gas. And moving on, events of the recent time has affected almost every sector, like I said earlier, especially the oil and gas sector. As a result, Tony Elumelu, the founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, has decried the lack of adequate gas supply is affecting the operation of power plants in the country. This, he implied, was affecting electricity supply in the country. He stated these at the annual general conference of the Nigerian Bar Association. During his remarks at the event, he said it was time for the country to invest in its power sector and create regulatory structures that would deliver sustainable power supply to the people, schools, hospitals, and industries. According to him, the country has idle gas fields even when there is so much private capital that can be channeled as needed investments for gas production. He stated that regulatory constraints and self-serving policies were holding back these investments. The founder of the foundation further stated that the Nigerian private sector has been showing the watching world the country's capability, ingenuity, and institutionalization. Now, he, however, stated that these global businesses with Nigerian origins were far too few. And in Naira floating, Nigeria's external reserves dropped by $950 million after the Central Bank of Nigeria officially floated the Naira and liberalized the foreign exchange market. CBN data showed that the reserves, which stood at $34.66 billion as of June 14, 2023, when the Naira was floated, fell to $33.74 billion as of August 24, 2023. The Naira value had closed at 471.67 Naira per dollar at the investor and exporter forex window on June 13, that is a day before the CBN announced the Naira float. Now, following the development, the local currency fell to over 700 Naira per dollar at the I and E window. The Naira has been trading at over 700 Naira per dollar since then. Meanwhile, at the parallel market, the Naira was bought and sold for 900 to 915 Naira per dollar. Pound sterling was bought and sold for 1,160 Naira to 1,180 Naira, according to Bureau, the change operators who spoke with newsmen. And still on the Naira issue, there are indications that commercial banks and merchant banks are increasingly depending on the Central Bank of Nigeria for liquidity as their borrowings from the Apex Bank has intensified in the last 8 months of 2023. Now, aside from August 2023, commercial banks and merchant banks borrowed a total of 12.46 trillion Naira from the CBN during the first 8 months of this year, according to the CBN data assessed by our correspondent. The financial institutions had in the first 8 months of 2022 borrowed 6.96 trillion Naira from the central bank, representing an increase of 79%. Now, commercial banks and merchant banks access lending from the Apex Bank using the standing lending facility window and deposit cash with the Apex Bank using the standing deposit window facility. Well, you're still watching Business This Week on Viewer Television. It's time for a short break, and when we return, the program continues. Stay with us.
In this 21st century where all the information we need is now in the palm of our hands. News from around the world, entertainment, celebrity gossip, sports, and much more. The only thing that you need is the right source. Viewer TV is now on the go. Simply check us out on our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter for all the information you need.
Welcome back. If you're just joining, this is Business This Week on Viewer Television. Moving on, let's take a look at the National Housing Fund. Now, the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria have disagreed over the management of the Contributory National Housing Fund. The NHF, which is an offshoot of NHF Act of 1992, which mandates all employers is in both the private and public sectors to make monthly remittances to fund, is an initiative of the federal government aimed at mobilization of funds for the provision of affordable residential houses for Nigerians. Now, the disagreement between the labor union and the nation's apex mortgage institutions stemmed from recent threats by the former that it would pull out of the contributory funds owing to its dissatisfaction regarding how the fund was being managed. While speaking, the group head of the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, Mrs. Timan Elayo, countered claims made by the NLC president, Joe Ajero, who told an investigative hearing organized by an ad hoc committee of the House of Representatives that administrative bottlenecks in the process of assessing the mortgage scheme had created room for corruption in the system. And on NBS Kicks, the former statistician general of the Federation, Chief Executive Officer of the National Bureau of Statistics, Dr. Yemi Kale, has said he resisted the urge to further change the country's unemployment data gathering methodology during his time as head of the statistics body. He spoke barely a week after the NBS released a new data that put unemployment at 4.1%. The agency had put unemployment at 33% in the last quarter of 2020. Now, he noted that the committee in charge of reviewing the minimum number of work hours to count as unemployed felt 1 hour did not make sense because income generated within that time frame was not necessarily livable. He further stated that the income generated from 20 hours of work in Nigeria would equate to that made from working 1 hour in the US. He further opined that the most important point of data is to give policymakers the tools they need to understand the problems, proffer solutions, and monitor the impact of those problems. And moving on, the Federal Executive Council this week unfolded a 3-year economic revival plan to address the social and economic challenges affecting the country. Now, the inaugural cabinet meeting, which was held at the council chambers of the Presidential Villa Abuja, was presided over by President Bola Tinubu, who unveiled his vision for economic growth, prosperity for all, and ending poverty. Addressing the ministers, the president admonished them to achieve the first phase of his administration's 8-point agenda within 3 years, urging the members of his cabinet to work hard to revive the country's economy because Nigeria is in a difficult time. The president said the ministers have the capacity to make a difference in the ministries they have been assigned to oversee. And you're still watching Business This Week. Moving on, banks, insurance companies, and other financial institutions contributed a 1.72 trillion naira to the nation's real gross domestic product in the first half of the year. That is in the first half of 2023. Now, these represent 27% year-on-year growth from the 1.35 trillion naira contributed in the same period of 2022. The analysis of GDP in the second quarter of 2023 report, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, showed that financial institutions contributed 846.774 billion naira to the 17.72 trillion naira national GDP in the second quarter of 2023. This also represents that 2.8% quarter-on-quarter has declined from the 870.8 trillion naira contributed to the nation's GDP of 17.75 trillion naira in the first quarter of 2023. The NBS also stated that the finance and insurance sector consists of two subsectors, which are financial institutions and insurance, in which the former accounted for 90.78% and the latter accounts for 9.22% of the sector, respectively, terms in the second quarter of 2023. The sector grew at 28% in nominal terms, with the growth rate of financial institutions at 30.41% and 8.29% growth rates recorded for insurance, in which the overall rate was lower than the second quarter of 2022 by 1.90% and higher by 5.63% than the preceding year. And on taxation, let's take a look at the taxes. Now we know that taxes on products in the country rose to 1.36 trillion naira in the first 6 months of 2023, despite worsening hardship across the board. This is a 113.29% increase from the 636 billion naira it was in the first 6 months of 2021, and a 25% increase from the 1.09 trillion naira it was in the corresponding period of 2022. These figures were obtained from the National Bureau of Statistics data on net indirect taxes on products and are based on current basic prices. When adjusted for inflation, the taxes on products amounted to 465 billion naira in the first 6 months of 2023, a 34.98% increase from the 345.19 billion naira it was in the first 6 months of 2021. And this is an 11.94% increase from the 916.23 billion naira it was in the corresponding period of 2022. Now, according to World Bank, net indirect taxes are the sum of product taxes less subsidies. It stated that product taxes are taxes payable by producers as they relate to the production, sale, purchase, or use of the goods and services. And investors in the stock market has recorded a 510 billion naira gain after all share index, the key performance measurement barometer in the market, hit a 15-year high. Now, the all-share index of Nigerian Exchange Limited rose by 0.51% to 66 points from 66 to 66.38 points, surpassing the highest value of 66.20 recorded on the exchange on March 5th, 2008. This performance was in fact attributed to a surge in banking stocks as investors strategically positioned themselves, taking advantage of the recent record earnings posted by the banks. Now, consequently, market capitalization increased by 0.51% to close at 39.6 trillion naira from 36.21 trillion naira recorded this week, with investors gaining 510 billion naira at the end of the day. Now, reacting to the development, the Vice Chairman, High Cap Securities, David Adonri, said the implication is that the market is deeper and should be more resilient. Well, that's all we can take on business this week today. My name is Chinwe Okocha, and from all of us here at Viwa Television, we say thank you and see you same time next week. Bye for now.